Have you ever looked at a couple who's been married for 40, 45 years and wondered, how? Not in an admiring way, in a genuinely baffled way. Like, how are two people still choosing each other after all that time, all that life, all those hard years that nobody warns you about? I'm 76 years old, and I have been thinking about that question a lot lately. I was married to my husband Frank for 33 years before I lost him. 33 years. And I want to tell you something right up front that I don't think people say enough. Not all of those years were good. Some of them were really hard. Some of them, if I'm being completely honest with you, were years where I didn't particularly like him very much. And I think he'd say the same about me if he could. But we stayed. We kept showing up. And somewhere around year 25, something shifted. Something I didn't have a name for back then, but I understand a lot better now. I've been watching couples my whole life. It's hard not to when you spend 28 years as a school secretary. You see parents come in together in the mornings. You watch how they talk to each other, or don't talk to each other. You notice things. You file things away. And now, at 76, with all that filing behind me, I think I've finally figured out a few things about what actually keeps two people together. Not the things we say at weddings, the real things. The first one is going to sound strange, but stay with me. The couples I know who've made it past 40 years together, the ones who are genuinely happy, not just coasting, they didn't protect the original spark. They let it die. And then they built something new. Not once, 2, 3, 4 times. They watched what they had burned down, and they had to make a gut-wrenching decision about whether to build again from the ashes. There's a woman from my church. I'll call her Margaret to protect her privacy. She and her husband have been married 47 years. I asked her once what the secret was. She laughed at me. Not meanly, just like I'd asked a very naive question. She said, "Dorothy, the man I married at 23 is gone. Long gone, and so is the woman he married. We've had to fall in love with completely different people 3 or 4 times over." I thought that was the most honest thing I'd ever heard anyone say about marriage, because we pretend the goal is to maintain something, to preserve it, when the truth is people change, completely, and the real work isn't holding on to who someone was, it's being willing to meet who they're becoming. Frank at 50 was not Frank at 30, not even close. He was quieter, more inward, carrying things he didn't always know how to say. And I had to decide if I wanted to know that man, not the one in our wedding photos, that man. Now here's something that took me decades to understand, and I'll tell you about a couple I watched figure this out in real time. Their names, I'll say Tom and Patricia, just to have something to call them. They'd been married about 30 years when Patricia went through something that changed her. A health scare, a real one, the kind that makes you reassess everything. And Tom, bless him, kept responding to the old Patricia, the one who handled everything efficiently and didn't like to talk about feelings. And the more he responded to that old version, the more Patricia felt invisible. Not unloved, invisible. There's a difference. What the happiest long-married couples do, and researchers actually have a name for this, is something called positive sentiment override. When their partner says something that could go 2 ways, they automatically choose the generous reading. They assume good intent. Couples who are quietly drifting toward late-life divorce do the exact opposite. They're scanning every sentence for hidden disrespect, every sigh, every pause. And I know that sounds simple, but think about how many conversations you've had in your own life where you heard the worst possible interpretation of something your partner said, when maybe, they just worded it badly. A marriage therapist I heard speak at a conference years ago said something I've never forgotten. She said, "When you catch yourself assuming the worst about a comment your spouse just made, stop and ask yourself, what would I think if my closest friend said those exact same words in that exact same tone?" Because we give our friends such enormous grace. And sometimes the person we love most gets the least of it. But I want to tell you something else. Something I didn't see coming when I thought about what keeps people together. And it's almost embarrassingly small when I say it out loud. It's touch. Not the dramatic kind, the ordinary kind. A hand on the lower back when you pass each other in the kitchen. Sitting close enough on the couch that your knees touch. A real goodbye kiss. Not the distracted little peck that becomes habit, but something that actually means, I see you, I'm here, I'll be back. I know a man, a widower, who lost his wife of 41 years, and when I asked him what he missed most, I expected him to say something big. He said he missed sitting next to her on the couch with their legs touching. That was the thing he named first. Because apparently the nervous system, the actual body, registers that kind of consistent, low-level physical contact as safety. And safety, over the long stretch of a life together, is what keeps the walls from going up between two people sharing a house decade after decade. Now I have to tell you about the fighting, because this is the part nobody talks about, and I think it's the part that saves marriages more than anything else. Frank and I fought about the same things for 30 years. The same things. Money, his mother, the way I overscheduled our weekends, the same arguments, cycling back around every few months like seasons. And for the first 15 years or so, I genuinely believed that if we were smart enough, patient enough, communicative enough, we could finally resolve them. We could put them to rest. Research. And I don't often quote studies, but this one stopped me cold when I heard it. Research suggests that roughly 69% of recurring conflicts in long marriages are what they call perpetual. They don't get permanently resolved, ever. They're just features of two different people living one life. And the couples who thrive aren't the ones who solve them. They're the ones who stop trying to win them. They built agreements instead. We don't talk about money after 9 at night. We alternate who chooses where holidays are spent. We've accepted that one of us will always leave the cabinet doors open, and we have chosen, actively chosen, to find that funny instead of maddening. Frank used to leave his shoes right in the middle of the hallway, every single day, for 33 years. And somewhere around year 20, I stopped fighting it. I just started stepping over them, and sometimes I'd even move them somewhere funny, on top of the television, outside the bathroom door, and he'd come find me laughing, and he'd shake his head, and we'd both laugh. That's the thing. Contempt will leave a scar every time. Humor clears the air. But I have to come back to something I said earlier about the couples who are genuinely happy, because there's a piece I left out, and it matters. And it has to do with what these people know about each other right now. Not 10 years ago. Right now. I'll tell you a story about a couple I know. I've known them for years through church, and they've been together for 42 years. She told me once that her husband still knows what she's worried about this week. Not in a general way, specifically. He knows which one of her grandchildren she's been praying over and why. He knows she's been nervous about a test result, and he asks about it without her having to bring it up. And I said to her, "How does he know all of that?" And she looked at me like it was obvious. "He asks," she said. "He asks, and then he actually stays in the room for the answer." That is the whole thing right there. Asking a real question and staying present for the complete answer. No phone, no jumping in with solutions. Just, what's weighing on you? What are you looking forward to? Because after 40 years together, the danger isn't that you've stopped loving each other. The danger is that you've stopped being genuinely curious about who they're still becoming. And people are always still becoming someone. At 60, at 70, at 80. I know that from my own experience. George, the man I loved for the last 5 years of his life, George was still surprising me when he was in his late 70s. Still figuring out new things to think about, new things to feel strongly about, and staying curious about that, refusing to assume I already knew everything he was. That was the best thing I ever did in a relationship. It was also the thing I did worst with Frank in our early years, and I'm not proud of that. Now, there's something else I need to say. The honest part that doesn't get included in the anniversary speeches. Almost every couple I know who's made it past 40 years has had stretches, sometimes lasting a full year or longer, where leaving felt like the most rational decision on earth, where the math of continuing didn't add up. I know a woman, been married 45 years, who once packed a bag and sat with it at the foot of the bed for 3 days. Didn't leave, but came very close. And what she told me is that she didn't stay out of inertia or fear of being alone. She stayed because she and her husband sat down and renegotiated their entire marriage from scratch. Who handles what? What needs have gone unmet for too long? What resentments had been swallowed and were quietly poisoning everything? They tore it all the way down and rebuilt it on purpose. And the marriage that came out the other side was nothing like the one they'd walked into. It was harder won, more deliberate, more theirs. That's a different thing entirely from just staying because it's easier than leaving. That's choosing again, actively, with full knowledge of what you're choosing. And the reason I think admiration is at the center of all of this, not passion, not communication, not even compatibility, is that admiration is the thing that survives. Passion changes. Communication can be learned, but whether you can still speak about your partner with genuine warmth when they're not in the room, that's the real test. That's the canary in the mine. If you've noticed that warmth has faded, and I'm not judging you if it has, I understand how that happens over decades of real life. One thing clinical psychologists suggest is almost embarrassingly simple. Write down 3 specific things you honestly respect about your spouse. Not general things, specific things. The way they handle a hard conversation, the way they show up for someone who's struggling, something you've watched them do that you genuinely admire. And then read those things to yourself before your next real conversation. Because admiration that's been deliberately rebuilt after being tested by time and change is stronger than admiration that was never challenged. It's harder to shake. It knows what it survived. And here's the thing I want to leave you with, because it's the thing that surprised me most when I started really paying attention to these long marriages. When you ask these couples to point to their best years, almost none of them say the beginning. The honeymoon, the first decade, the young, beautiful years that look best in photographs. Those aren't the ones they choose. The years they name most often are the ones right after the children left home. Around years 25 to 35, when the financial pressure had finally started to ease and the house got quiet and they sat across a kitchen table from each other and had to honestly figure out whether they actually liked the real person sitting there, not the memory of that person, the actual person in front of them, with all their changes and scars and evolutions. And most of them discovered, with genuine surprise, that they did. But only because they were willing to meet that person fresh, to stop searching for the ghost of who they'd married, and be curious instead about who was actually there. I think about Frank sometimes, and what those years might have looked like for us if we'd had more of them. I think we were getting there. I think we were finally learning how to see each other properly. And then we didn't have more time. So if you have more time, and I hope you do, please don't waste it assuming you already know who's sitting across from you. Ask a real question tonight. Stay in the room for the answer. If this landed somewhere in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'd love to know in the comments, what's the most surprising thing you've learned about what keeps love alive over the long haul? Drop it below. And if you want to keep having these conversations, subscribe. I'll be here.